Hi, welcome back to True Crime Echoes, where the shadows of the past never really disappear. I'm glad you're here because today's story, it's one of the most unbelievable I've ever come across. Not just because of the crimes themselves, though trust me, they're shocking, but because of who got away with them. We're going to talk about a woman named Sharon Kinne, a wife, a mother, a beauty queen in the making, and allegedly a killer. Her story stretches across decades, borders, and courtroom after courtroom, and yet somehow she slipped through every crack. What started as a simple tragedy in a small Missouri town turned into a twisted international mystery that remains unsolved to this day. So get comfortable, because this one isn't just about murder, it's about manipulation power and how far someone will go, not just to get what they want, but to escape what they've done. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Can't a girl just have a breakdown in peace? You know, sometimes life just breaks you, and when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for the cameras to stop rolling or for you to be in a good place mentally. It just hits hard, and that's kind of where I've been. I know I've been gone for a while. You probably noticed. Or maybe you didn't, and honestly, either is okay. I've had people reach out asking if I'm okay, if I'm ever coming back. And first of all, thank you. That really means more than you know. But to answer your question, yes, I'm okay. Or at least I'm trying to be. And I think that counts. 2022 was something else. It felt like the floor got ripped out from under me, and suddenly I didn't know which way was up. Everything just kaboom flipped. Emotionally, mentally, creatively, I lost my grip on it all. And so I stepped away. Not because I stopped caring, not because I gave up, but because I just needed to breathe. And maybe that's reason enough. There's this weird pressure to always be present, always be productive, always be okay, especially when you do what I do. And for a while, I let that pressure mold me into something that didn't feel like me anymore. I was trying to say the right things, avoid the wrong ones, meet every expectation, read every comment, and it got so loud in my head that I couldn't hear my own voice. But that stops now. This is me, reclaiming my space, my voice, my stories. And honestly, I miss this so much. So this new chapter, it's not just a return, it's a reset, a reminder of why I started doing this in the first place. I love true crime. I love the dark psychology, the questions we may never get answers to, and the way a single moment can change everything for everyone involved. It's not about the shock value. It's about the humanity, the broken pieces, the cracks in the system, the real lives left behind in the aftermath. That's what I want to bring back. And yeah, no more theme song. At least not for now. It doesn't feel right anymore. This is a new era, something raw, something honest, something a little more stripped down. So if you're still here with me, thank you. Truly, let's talk about people, about decisions, about desperation and manipulation and murder. Because today, we're starting with a story that's been sitting in the back of my mind for months. A story that begins in a small town in Missouri with a girl named Sharon, and once you hear it, you won't forget her name. Not ever. Chapter 2. Small Town, Dreams and Quiet Desperation. Our story begins in a place called Independence, Missouri. And if that name sounds familiar, it's probably because it feels like the kind of town you read about in novels, the kind with wide streets, tidy lawns, and neighbors who all know each other's business. The kind of place where nothing big ever seems to happen, until it does. Back in the 1940s, Independence was home to about 16,000 people. By the 1960s, that number had exploded to over 100,000. It was growing fast, but it still carried that small town feeling. Everyone knew your name. Everyone had an opinion. And for some people, that felt safe. For others, it felt suffocating. For a girl named Sharon, it was the latter. Sharon Kinne was born and raised in Independence, and even as a young girl, she was already dreaming of the day she could leave. Friends would later say she was the type of person who didn't just dream, she planned. She'd look at magazines filled with glamorous celebrities, polished houses, stylish cars, and she'd imagine herself there. Anywhere but here. She didn't want ordinary. She didn't want a quiet life with a white picket fence and church on Sundays. She wanted more. More excitement, more money, more attention, and she wasn't afraid to admit it. By 16, Sharon was already flipping through beauty magazines like they were instruction manuals. She idolized the women on the pages, sophisticated, powerful, free. And that's when she met James. James Kinne was 22, a college student home for the summer. He was tall, clean-cut, polite, the kind of guy small-town parents loved. He was also attending Brigham Young University, studying engineering. And most importantly to Sharon, he had already escaped. He had left Independence behind and made it somewhere else. That to her was intoxicating. She was 16, he was 22. Yeah, the age gap was questionable even by 1950s standards, but no one seemed too concerned. In fact, their relationship quickly became the talk of the town. He was the responsible, ambitious student. She was the bright-eyed beauty with stars in her eyes. They spent that summer wrapped up in each other. Movies, church events, sneaking kisses behind the bleachers, it was all very fast and very intense. And when James returned to Utah to continue his studies, he promised to write. And he did. Letters went back and forth, filled with hope and longing, and a future neither of them had quite figured out yet. And then Sharon dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. Now this was the 1950s. James was Mormon, and pregnancy outside of marriage. That wasn't just frowned upon, it could destroy your entire life. So, James did what many would call the right thing. He came back to Independence and married Sharon, quickly, quietly. Sharon converted to Mormonism, and they moved back to Utah together, so James could finish school. For Sharon, it must have felt like she was finally on track to the life she dreamed of. She had escaped her small town, married a college student with potential, and moved to a place where nobody knew her history. It was everything she wanted, or so it seemed. But life, as we know, rarely follows the script we write in our heads. Soon after moving to Utah, Sharon had a miscarriage. And while we'll never really know if she was ever pregnant in the first place, rumors swirled, the loss marked the beginning of a slow unraveling. They did eventually have a child together, a daughter born in 1957. And from the outside they looked like a young couple just trying to make it work. But on the inside, cracks were forming. James was stressed. Between schoolwork and being a new father, he was overwhelmed. Eventually, he dropped out of college. And when that happened, the dream, her dream, shattered. They moved back to Independence. Back to the town Sharon had tried so hard to leave. Back to a house just down the road from James's conservative, overbearing parents, who, by the way, didn't like Sharon from the start. To them, she wasn't the right kind of woman. Not for their son. And definitely not for the church. So there she was, young, stuck, judged, and surrounded by people who didn't understand her and never would. For a woman like Sharon, that kind of life felt like a trap, and trapped people, well, sometimes they make dangerous choices. Chapter 3. A Marriage. Cracking at the seams. When they came back to Independence, everything felt like a step backward. What had started out as a dream, a new life, a new home, maybe even a clean slate, had unraveled so fast it probably left Sharon dizzy. Instead of glamorous city lights and sophisticated parties, she got a small house near her in-laws' judgmental stares and a reality she never signed up for. And here's the thing, it wasn't just that life was hard. It was that it was ordinary. And to Sharon, that might have been worse. James, who once seemed like a ticket to something bigger, was now just another man working long hours trying to keep a roof over their heads. He was exhausted, emotionally distant, and not the wide-eyed college guy she'd fallen for. He'd dropped out of school. Their money was tight. He had become stagnant. And Sharon. She resented it. All of it. They moved into a house close to James's parents, who were, let's just say, extremely devout and extremely opinionated. They didn't trust Sharon, didn't believe she was a true Mormon, and made no effort to hide it. It was like being under surveillance 24/7. Every move she made was criticized. Every word was dissected. Sharon didn't just feel stuck. She felt watched. Then came their second child, a baby boy, born in May of 1959. On paper, they were a classic suburban family husband-wife, 2 kids. But behind closed doors, the marriage was crumbling. Fast. Arguments became routine. Resentment piled up. And as often happens when 2 people feel trapped, the betrayals started. James was the first to stray, or at least he was the first one to get caught. He had reconnected with an old flame and Sharon found out. The betrayal hit her hard, but instead of pulling away, she pushed back harder. She weaponized her pain. She wanted control. So she started seeing someone too. An old boyfriend. Nothing serious, at least at first, but it gave her leverage. A secret of her own. And honestly, a sense of power she hadn't felt in a long time. But here's where it gets complicated and really kind of manipulative. Sharon didn't tell James about her affair. Instead, she let him carry all the guilt. She made him feel like the sole reason their marriage was falling apart, even while she was doing the exact same thing behind his back. It was twisted, strategic, and honestly kind of brilliant in a cold, calculated way. But I think what really stung, what really lit the fire inside her was this realization that her escape plan had failed. She thought she'd married her way out, that James would take her somewhere new, give her a life worth bragging about. Instead, she was right back where she started. Same town, same limitations, except now she had 2 kids, a mortgage, and a husband she couldn't stand. She wanted out, not just emotionally, legally, financially, permanently. And so she gave James an ultimatum: she'd agree to a divorce, but only if she got full custody of the children, the house, and $1,000 in cash, something to hold her over until she could get on her feet. James didn't know what to do. He was stuck between a rock and a very hard place. So like many people raised in deeply religious homes, he went to the people who had always told him what to think, his parents. And predictably, they told him absolutely not. Divorce was a sin. It was not an option. They believed marriage was forever, even if it was toxic. Even if it was cold. Even if it was already broken. They told him to fix it. So he tried. James went back to Sharon and said he wanted to work things out. That he believed they could rebuild. That they owed it to the kids. But nothing changed. Nothing got better. The love, if it was ever there, was gone. And in its place was tension, silence, suspicion. By March of 1960, their daughter was almost 3, their son not even a year old. 2 little kids caught in the middle of a marriage that felt like it was held together with duct tape and false hope. And then on March 19th, everything changed. James was tired. There was a church dinner that night, but he wanted to rest first. So he laid down in the bedroom for a nap while Sharon got ready in the bathroom. A few minutes later, she heard a sound. A bang. She ran into the bedroom, and what she found would change the course of her life forever. Chapter 4. The Bang That Changed Everything. March 19th, 1960. It was supposed to be just another Saturday. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. Sharon was getting ready for a church dinner that evening, standing in the bathroom, fixing her hair, maybe applying a little makeup. James, feeling a bit tired, decided to lie down for a quick nap before they headed out. Their daughter, just shy of 3 years old, was playing somewhere nearby. Their 10-month-old son was likely down for a nap. It was quiet, domestic, a peaceful slice of life on the surface. But then, there was a sound, a bang. Sharon said it was so loud, so sudden, that it didn't even register as a gunshot at first. Just a sharp, terrifying noise that cracked through the silence. And her first instinct was panic, like any mother would feel. She ran into the bedroom, unsure of what she was about to find, and that's when she saw it. James was lying on the bed, blood pooling beneath his head. Their daughter was standing beside him, and next to her, on the pillow, was a gun. A .22 caliber pistol. James's pistol. According to Sharon, their daughter looked confused, innocent. She said something like, "Daddy, how does this work?" A heartbreaking echo of curiosity and unknowing. Sharon froze, the way any of us would. Then the screaming started. James had been shot in the back of the head. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication he had moved, and according to Sharon, no one else had been in the room except their toddler. And so the unbelievable began to take shape. A 2-year-old, just 2, had somehow gotten hold of a real loaded firearm and pulled the trigger. At least That's what Sharon claimed. Police arrived on the scene and, as you'd expect, were completely stunned. The idea that a toddler could accidentally kill their father, it was unthinkable. But what made things more complicated, more murky, was how Sharon reacted. Officers said she was distraught, hysterical, genuinely shaken. They noted how hard it was for her to speak, how she kept breaking down mid-sentence. And here's the thing, people believed her. Or at least they wanted to. She didn't come off like a killer. She came off like a mother, a woman in shock. Police tried to question the little girl, but she was 2 years old. What could she really say? Her answers were vague, fragmented. She could talk, sure, but not with the kind of detail anyone needed. And so the officers made a decision that would change the course of the investigation entirely. They didn't perform a gunshot residue test. Not on the child, not on Sharon. They said it was to protect the family, to avoid traumatizing them further. But in doing so, they lost the chance to gather the only concrete evidence that could have told them who really pulled that trigger. It's easy now, looking back, to shake our heads at that decision. But this was 1960. Gunshot residue tests were slow, clunky, and invasive, and Sharon She looked like a grieving wife, a broken mother, the lead investigator, though he had doubts. Quiet ones. But real. Could a 2-year-old really lift a gun, aim it with enough accuracy, and pull the trigger all without dropping it, to find out they brought the little girl back in days later? They gave her an unloaded version of the same gun and asked her to play with it. She picked it up, she held it. But she never pulled the trigger, which meant nothing really. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing either. They ran tests, asked firearms experts, and still they couldn't say for sure whether a toddler had the strength or dexterity to fire a .22 pistol. So they settled on a theory, one that was convenient. Maybe the child had climbed onto the bed. Maybe she was holding the gun, and her body weight shifted. Maybe somehow the pressure was enough to set the gun off. It didn't make a lot of sense. But without evidence, without a witness, without a confession, without residue, what choice did they have? James was pronounced dead at the scene. Just 25 years old. A tragedy. That's what the town called it. A terrible, unthinkable freak accident. That's what people wanted to believe. But there was one thing no one could ignore. James had a life insurance policy, a big one. $250,000? That's a lot of money, even by today's standards. But in 1960, that was a fortune. And James, 25 years old, newly married, struggling financially, didn't really have a reason to be worth that much dead. But a month after his death, Sharon collected the full amount. No questions asked. Well, not yet anyway. Chapter 5. A Dream. Car, a new flame, and another woman. Gone after James's death, Sharon didn't exactly disappear into mourning. In fact, she did the opposite. Just a few weeks after burying her husband, she was seen out and about, smiling, shopping, driving around Independence, like someone who had just won the lottery. And in a way, she had. That life insurance payout. It came through fast. $250,000 in her pocket. No delay. No scrutiny. It was more money than most people in that town would see in a lifetime. And the first thing she did, she bought a car. Not just any car. A brand new, shiny blue Ford Thunderbird. It was sleek, stylish, and flashy, the kind of car that made people stop and stare. And in 1960s Missouri, a single mother driving a Thunderbird wasn't just unusual, it was scandalous. That's how she met Walt. Walt was a 23-year-old car salesman. Handsome, smooth-talking, married with 2 kids. But none of that seemed to matter, not to Sharon, and apparently not to Walt either. Because before long, the two were having an affair. At first, it seemed like a fling. Maybe just a distraction for Sharon or an ego boost for Walt. But it escalated quickly. Sharon wasn't just interested in sleeping with Walt. She wanted him, all of him, and she wasn't exactly subtle about it. Then things got darker. One day, Walt showed up at the police station to report that his wife, 23-year-old Patricia Jones, was missing. He told police that 2 nights earlier they'd had a fight. Nothing unusual, just one of those arguments that married couples have when things are tense. But the next day, Patricia didn't come home from work, and that's when things started to feel wrong. Walt said he called her co-workers, hoping maybe she was just blowing off steam, but they told him something strange, After her shift ended, Patricia had been seen walking toward a light-colored Chevy that had pulled up outside. She spoke to the woman in the car and then got in. That woman, it turned out, was Sharon. When Walt confronted Sharon about it, she didn't deny it. In fact, she had a story ready. She told him she'd gone to see Patricia woman to woman to tell her that her sister was having an affair with Walt. Now let me pause here for a second. Sharon didn't have a sister. That part completely made up. But she told Patricia the lie anyway, hoping it would drive a wedge between them. She said Patricia needed to know the truth, that she deserved better. According to Sharon, they drove around, talked for a while, and then she dropped Patricia off, about a block from her house. That was the last time anyone saw Patricia alive. At first, Walt tried to believe her. Maybe Patricia had stormed off somewhere. Maybe she just needed space. But something about the story didn't sit right with him, especially when Sharon started talking about seeing Patricia walk up to another man's car afterward. A green one driven by someone she didn't recognize. It sounded like a cover. And Walt, who had just tried to break things off with Sharon not long before, started to panic. He told police he was sure Sharon had done something, that she was angry, vindictive, and capable of far more than he'd realized. He even admitted he'd gone to her house and threatened her, demanding to know what she'd done with his wife. But Sharon didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because later that same day, a man named John Blades, a gas station attendant, called the police and said he'd found something. Or rather, someone. He said he was out near an abandoned farm on the outskirts of Independence, a place the locals called Lover's Lane, when he stumbled on a body in the grass. It was Patricia. She had been shot in the head, the shoulder, and the abdomen. Close range. No signs of robbery. No clear motive. There were signs that someone had tried to stage the scene as a sexual assault, but the coroner found no physical evidence to support that. It was a distraction, a detail meant to confuse, to throw the investigation off course. But it didn't work. Because very quickly, all eyes turned to Sharon. She was the last person to see Patricia alive. She had motive, she had lied, and she was already wrapped in the suspicious death of her husband just months before. But there was something else. That man, John Blades, the one who found the body he was dating Sharon too. Chapter 6. Tangled Lies and an Empty Gun Box. By the time Patricia's body was discovered, Sharon was already wrapped in more layers of suspicion than anyone could keep track of. And when police found out that John Blades, the man who had discovered Patricia's body, was not only dating Sharon, but had actually been with her just hours before calling the police, things got messy, fast. Now let's back up for a second. At first, John told police he'd just been out for a drive when nature called. He claimed he pulled over near Lover's Lane to relieve himself and just happened to stumble across a body in the grass. Right. Police were skeptical, and honestly, who wouldn't be? Lover's Lane wasn't exactly next to the road. You had to walk a little ways into the brush to get there. It wasn't the kind of place you'd choose for a casual bathroom break. Not unless you were looking for something, or someone. Eventually, under pressure, John admitted that he hadn't been alone. He'd been with his girlfriend. And yes, his girlfriend was Sharon Kinne. He said she was the one who had insisted they drive out there. She'd told him that maybe Patricia was with another man trying to get back at Walt. And maybe, just maybe, they'd catch her in the act. That's how casual it sounded. Like they were going to spy on someone who skipped work, not find a body. John claimed that Sharon stayed in the car while he walked into the field, and that's when he saw Patricia's body. But his story kept shifting. Small details changed. His tone changed. And the deeper police dug, the more obvious it became that none of this was adding up. So they brought Sharon in for questioning. She was calm, controlled, maybe even too calm. When they asked her about the day Patricia went missing, Sharon admitted she had seen her. She didn't deny it. But she insisted it had been a simple conversation, a misunderstanding. She told the same story she gave Walt, that she had warned Patricia about the supposed affair with her fake sister, and then dropped her off nearby. When asked why she never mentioned seeing Patricia to police earlier, Sharon just shrugged, said she didn't think it mattered. But here's what did matter. Police asked Sharon, Walt, and John to all take a polygraph test. Walt agreed. John agreed. Sharon refused. Now we all know polygraph tests aren't foolproof. They're not even admissible in court. But still, it's the refusal that raises eyebrows. Not because it proves guilt, but because it signals something else control. Sharon didn't want to play by their rules, not anymore. While Sharon was being questioned, police executed a search warrant at her house. That's when they found the gun box. It was a box for a .22 caliber pistol, the same type of weapon used to kill Patricia. But the box was empty. No gun inside. When asked about it, Sharon gave another casual answer. She said she had bought the gun recently to replace the one police had taken after James's death. You know, the one her toddler allegedly used. She said she lost the new gun 2 days after buying it. Just lost it. A brand new firearm. Gone. No explanation. No report filed. Just vanished. And somehow that wasn't even the worst part. The investigation had already been compromised. The funeral home had collected Patricia's body before an autopsy could be performed. By the time police realized the mistake, the body had already been embalmed and washed. Any evidence that might have been there, skin cells, gunpowder, residue bruising, was now lost forever. It was a disaster. And Sharon, she used it to her advantage. Because without physical evidence, without a murder weapon, without time of death, all police had were suspicions. But they weren't ready to give up. On May 31st, 1960, Sharon was arrested, officially. Not just for the murder of Patricia Jones, but also for the murder of her husband, James Kinne. And look, it sounded good. It made headlines. It looked like justice was finally catching up with her. But here's the part no one saw coming. This wasn't the end of the story, not even close, because Sharon Kinne, she had one more twist up her sleeve. Chapter 7, The Pregnant Widow and a Courtroom Full of Sympathy. When Sharon was arrested, it felt for a moment like justice was finally aligning. After months of unanswered questions, a suspicious insurance payout, and now a second body with her fingerprints all over the timeline, it was only natural to believe this was it. That she'd be held accountable, that the truth would finally come out. But Sharon Kinne was always one step ahead. And her next move. It was something no one could have predicted. Just weeks before her trial was scheduled to begin, Sharon made a very public announcement she was pregnant. Again. Now the math didn't exactly work in her favor. She claimed the child belonged to James, her husband, who had been dead for over a year at that point. But that wasn't physically possible. Everyone knew it. The timeline just didn't add up. The far more likely, Father Walt, the married car salesman she'd been having an affair with before Patricia's murder. Still being pregnant granted Sharon something even more powerful than credibility time. The trial was postponed. People started looking at her differently. Not as a manipulative widow or an accused killer, but as a mother-to-be, vulnerable, fragile, a woman carrying a child facing a life sentence. Sympathy replaced suspicion. Public opinion began to shift, and Sharon knew exactly how to use that. When the trial finally began a full year later, her defense team wasted no time poking holes in the prosecution's case. There was no murder weapon. There was no autopsy. There was no confirmed time of death. Everything was circumstantial. And the biggest piece of potential evidence, that empty gun box in Sharon's home, was dismissed as meaningless. After all, the gun was never found, and without that, it might as well have not existed. Her lawyers leaned into the uncertainty. They painted her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a victim of gossip and tragedy. A young mother overwhelmed by grief and dragged through the mud by people desperate to assign blame. And shockingly, it worked. The jury deliberated. And after just a short time, they came back with a verdict, not guilty. People in the courtroom cheered. Yes, cheered. Some of them even asked Sharon for her autograph after the verdict was read. It was surreal. A woman who had not only been the last person to see Patricia Jones alive, but who had already lost a husband under mysterious circumstances, had just walked out of court completely free. And the reaction outside the courtroom, it wasn't outrage. It was admiration. They saw a young, pretty pregnant woman who had been through hell, who had somehow survived it all. The tragic widow, the misunderstood lover, the mother fighting to protect her children. That was the version of Sharon the public wanted to believe. And Sharon, she gave them exactly that. But of course, there was still one more case on the table. James. The death of her husband hadn't been forgotten. And now that Patricia's trial was over, prosecutors turned their full attention back to the man who'd died in his own bed, supposedly at the hands of his 2-year-old daughter. This time, though, they had something they didn't have before. A witness, John Blades, the man who had helped find Patricia's body and who had once been romantically involved with Sharon, was ready to talk. And what he had to say would change everything. Chapter 8. A Whisper, a Bribe, and a Failed Trap. After Sharon walked free from the Patricia Jones trial, you'd think she might have taken a step back, laid low, disappeared into the background. But Sharon didn't retreat. She never did. Because behind the scenes, the state was building its next case. This time for the death of James, her husband, the man who was shot in the back of the head while taking a nap with a toddler standing nearby. That story had always felt off. The angle, the positioning. The idea that a 2-year-old could pull the trigger cleanly, accurately, and no one ever thought to run a gunshot residue test. It left too many questions. And finally someone stepped forward to help answer them. John Blades. Now remember, John wasn't some random witness. He was at one point romantically involved with Sharon. He had been in her life during both investigations, and he'd already confessed to police that Sharon had suggested they go look for Patricia's body before it was found. He was there when they discovered it, and now he had more to say. According to John, 2 weeks before James was killed, Sharon approached him with a proposition. She wanted James dead, and she offered John $1,000 to do it. Now, to put that into perspective, $1,000 in 1960 was the equivalent of almost 10 grand today. A significant amount, but still, not quite worth becoming a hitman over. John said no immediately. He told police he was stunned. And when he declined, Sharon didn't back down. She asked him if he knew anyone else who might do it for her. That's how casual it was to her. Not emotional, not panicked, just practical. Police needed proof. Something stronger than John's word. Because as you can probably guess, John wasn't the most reliable guy in town. He was involved with Sharon, tangled up in multiple investigations, and definitely not squeaky clean. So they came up with a plan. They wired John's car with a hidden recorder. The idea was to get Sharon to confess, or at the very least acknowledge the offer she'd made to him. John would drive her around, strike up a conversation, and the cops would be listening from the back seat. Literally. This wasn't some high-tech sting operation. This was 1960. No discreet microphones, no mini-cams. Just a couple of officers hiding under a blanket in the backseat of a car holding a tape recorder, hoping Sharon wouldn't look behind her. Honestly, it was kind of ridiculous. But this was their best shot. So John did his part. He brought Sharon into the car. He started nudging the conversation, trying to steer her toward the subject. Hey, remember when you offered me that money to kill James? But Sharon didn't take the bait. She dodged, evaded, changed the subject, laughed things off. And after driving around for a while, it was clear she wasn't going to say anything incriminating. They had nothing. No tape, no confession. Just John's word. And the thing is, John's word alone wasn't enough. He had been close to Sharon. Too close. A jury could easily say he was jealous, bitter, maybe even looking for attention. So once again, the prosecution was left with a case built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. And yet, they went forward anyway. 2 years after James's death, Sharon was put on trial for his murder. But there was a new twist. One that no one expected. James's parents, the same ones who had once doubted Sharon, who had disapproved of her from day one, now stood by her. They testified that they believed the death of their son was truly an accident. That the 2-year-old had pulled the trigger, that Sharon had done nothing wrong. Why? Because Sharon had threatened to cut them off from their grandchildren if they didn't. She told them point blank, if you testify against me, you'll never see the kids again. And it worked. They sat in that courtroom under oath and defended the woman they believed had murdered their son. It was a stunning, gut-wrenching display of manipulation, and it painted the clearest picture yet of who Sharon really was, not just a suspected killer, but a woman who knew how to weaponize motherhood, who knew exactly where people were vulnerable and wasn't afraid to use that to get what she wanted. But even with the parents' support, the prosecution still had John. He took the stand. He told the jury about the murder-for-hire conversation, about how Sharon had asked him to kill her husband, about how she treated James not like a husband but like an obstacle, something to be removed. It was powerful. It was damning. And after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty. Sharon Kinne was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her husband. Finally, it felt like justice had landed. The community exhaled. Reporters ran their headlines. Prosecutors called it a victory. But if there's one thing we've learned by now, it's this, with Sharon Kinne. Nothing ever stays finished for long. Chapter 9. Hung juries, vanishing acts, and a new name in Mexico. For a brief moment, it looked like it was over. Sharon Kinne had been found guilty of murdering her husband. She was sentenced to life in prison. After years of suspicion, manipulation, and courtroom drama, the justice system had finally caught up with her, or so it seemed. But with Sharon, nothing was ever that simple. 18 months after her conviction, she appealed, and somehow she won. Her legal team argued that the trial had been flawed, that the prosecution relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a single witness, John Blades, whose own credibility was shaky at best. The appellate court agreed. Her conviction was overturned. And just like that, Sharon was no longer a convicted murderer. But rather than being retried immediately, she was released on bond, free, out in the world again. A woman once convicted of killing her husband was now walking the streets, shopping, socializing, dating. It was surreal. Over the next 2 years, Sharon would face not one, not two, but 3 more trials for James's death. The first ended in a mistrial, the second a hung jury. By the time the third one came around, scheduled for October 1964, the case was falling apart. The media had moved on. Witnesses were growing tired. Evidence had gone stale. And Sharon. She was nowhere to be found. She'd vanished. With just 1 month to go before her next trial, Sharon disappeared completely. No goodbye, no court filing, no explanation. She just left. It wasn't until weeks later that authorities discovered where she'd gone, Mexico. And of course she hadn't gone alone. She'd brought along her latest boyfriend, a man who, by all accounts, had no idea what kind of person he was traveling with. Together they checked into a hotel, under false names. Sharon had even begun using a new identity, Jeanette Pugliese. A fresh start, a clean slate, a woman reborn. But if Sharon thought Mexico would be her escape, she was wrong. Because barely a week into her stay, Sharon was arrested again, this time for murder. According to her version of events, she and her boyfriend had gotten sick after arriving. Food poisoning or something similar. She claimed that one night while her boyfriend was recovering in the hotel, she went out to get medicine. The pharmacy was closed, so she wandered into a local bar instead. Had a few drinks, met a man, and then for reasons that still feel slippery, she agreed to go back to his hotel room. What happened next depends on who you believe. According to Sharon, once they were alone in the room, the man tried to assault her. She fought back, pulled a gun, one she said she carried for protection, and shot him in self-defense. But that's not what hotel staff told police. They said they heard the gunshot around 3 a.m. When they ran into the room, the man was dead, and Sharon was calmly counting money in the bathroom. When the clerk startled her, she turned and shot him 2 in the arm. He survived. And Sharon. She tried to run. She didn't get far. When police searched her belongings, they found multiple firearms, fake identification documents, wads of cash, and enough personal items to suggest she wasn't on vacation, she was on the run. It looked like Sharon hadn't just escaped trial. She'd been planning a new life entirely. She was charged with murder in Mexico, and this time there was no sympathetic jury, no staged tears, no small-town charm. The Mexican court didn't see a misunderstood mother. They saw what she was, a woman with a pattern. A man ends up dead. Sharon is the last one with him. The gun is hers. And the excuses, always convenient. She was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But Sharon, being Sharon, wasn't done fighting. She appealed again, and it backfired. The court not only rejected her appeal, but actually increased her sentence to 13 years. For the first time, it looked like she would finally serve real time. She was behind bars in a foreign country, far from the lawyers who had kept her free for so long. But even prison couldn't hold Sharon forever. Because just 5 years later, she'd pull off one final trick. One so bold, so unbelievable, that to this day no one knows how she did it, and it's exactly what we'll talk about in the next chapter. Chapter 10. The Disappearance That Never Ended by 1969. Sharon Kinne had been behind bars in Mexico for nearly 5 years, not for the murder of her husband, not for the death of Patricia Jones, but for the killing of a man in a hotel room, a man whose name is barely remembered because by then, everything about Sharon was bigger than the people she left behind. She was now a triple murder suspect, a convicted killer, a woman with multiple identities, multiple lovers, and a growing mythos that blurred the line between reality and legend. But the prison bars in Mexico weren't the end of her story. Because on December 7th, 1969, sometime in the early morning hours, Sharon Kinne vanished again, this time for good. There was no riot, no dramatic breakout, no tunnel carved through concrete. She just walked out. At least that's what it looked like. No one, not the guards, not the warden, not even the Mexican government could explain how it happened. There were theories, of course. That someone on the inside helped her, that she bribed her way out, that she used charm or manipulation or just plain cash to slip through the cracks. But none of it was ever confirmed. And that's the most haunting part. To this day, over 5 decades later, no one has ever figured out exactly how she escaped. All they knew was that Sharon Kinne was gone. The Mexican authorities were embarrassed. The U.S. was stunned, and both countries quietly pointed fingers at each other, trying to decide who should take the blame. Back in Independence, Missouri, the town she once despised, people whispered her name like it was a ghost story. Sharon became a warning, a mystery, a legend. She was 29 years old when she disappeared. If she's still alive today, she'd be in her 90s. There have been rumors over the years, sightings in Canada, anonymous tips from South America, a woman in Oklahoma who looked just like her, a woman in Mexico City who was fluent in English but wouldn't talk about her past. None of it ever confirmed. None of it ever led to an arrest. And honestly, part of me wonders if she ever really planned to disappear forever, or if it just worked out that way. What we do know is this Sharon Elizabeth Kinne was the first woman in American history to be charged with murder in 3 separate cases in 2 different countries, and somehow she was never convicted in the U.S. 3 people that we know of died under her shadow. James, Patricia, a stranger in a hotel room, and Sharon, she got away. That fact, that feeling leaves a sour taste, because this isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about control, about charm, about the terrifying power of someone who knows exactly how to play the system and everyone in it. She wasn't a criminal mastermind, she wasn't particularly brilliant, but she was bold, shameless, unapologetically manipulative. And somehow, that was enough. It's easy to romanticize fugitives, to imagine them living under the radar, sipping coffee in some quiet corner of the world, reading newspapers in a new language surrounded by people who have no idea who they really are. And maybe that's exactly what Sharon did. Or maybe she died decades ago, buried under a different name, her secrets rotting along with her bones. We'll probably never know, because as of today, more than 50 years later, Sharon Kinne is still on the FBI's wanted list. No arrests, no confirmed sightings, no justice. Just a blank space where closure should be. And I think that's what makes this case so haunting, not just the murders, but the vanishing. The way she slipped through every net. The way she disappeared into legend. Because when we talk about Sharon Kinne today, we're not just talking about a killer. We're talking about a ghost in the shape of a woman. One who knew exactly how far a pretty smile, a well-timed lie, and a missing gun could carry her. And somehow, it was far enough. That was the story of Sharon Kinne, a woman who left behind 3 bodies, a trail of unanswered questions, and a justice system that could never quite catch up to her. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about monsters hiding in the dark. They're about people who smile at you across the dinner table, people who shake hands with police, people who know exactly how to say all the right things while doing all the wrong ones. If Sharon Kinne is still alive today, she's out there living under another name, carrying secrets the world will never fully uncover. And maybe that's the most chilling part. Thanks for watching True Crime Echoes. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think or made you feel something, consider subscribing, sharing, or just letting me know what you think in the comments. I read them all. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and above all, stay safe.